trigger warning. This book triggers me. This translation is extremely awful. And I don't say that lightly. I mean, this is an extremely awful translation. It should never have been published. Now, of course, when people come into the library, there's a question that they always ask.
Let me ask it. So you've read all these books?
Right. So,
how is Ulum al-Qur'an different from Ulum al-Tafsir, and is Ulum al-Tafsir a subset of Ulum al-Qur'an?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. We are here in the Quranic Studies Library in my home. This is my personal library, which I have built up over some years. It's still building. And it's also a library which I make available for researchers as much as I can, and step by step, getting more people, inshallah, to benefit from it through Ashur Centre, and broadly through all those who benefit through Bayyinah, Quran Foundation, Quran.com, all sorts of places where the benefits of these books dissipate. And this is where they are stored and where that energy is held in potential.
Alhamdulillah.
So I wanted this opportunity to talk through with my good friend Ustadh Nouman and explore what is in these books and what value they hold, how they're useful, how they're relevant, and lots of other practical things that people wonder about when it comes to sourcing books and different editions, and what to look for and how to get the most out of
When did
what
this
you buy.
kind of happen without you realizing it, or did you intentionally want to have a library?
Well, it started off as obviously when going to seek knowledge, studying abroad, especially when I had time to be longer periods abroad, like studying in Egypt. Yes, more and more I need the books to cover the topics that I'm studying. So you get books that are given to you by your teachers or assigned to you specifically, and then you see things that are relevant to that and important to that. So especially in Egypt, I would wander out into the bookstores round about Al-Azhar. And actually, I do a bit like what we're doing here, is I just look at things and take my time and just go through the shelves and thumb through the individual works and volumes. I just allow myself to be curious about the titles, you know, and there's so many things that just when you read the title, you think, oh, a whole book just about that?
Right.
About that letter in the Qur'an, there's a whole book, which is like 2 volumes, 3 volumes.
That's right.
Just on the ba, or just on ma, or just on hatta, right? So you realize that actually this Qur'an has so many sciences, its oceans are so vast that there's so many things to say about it. And even when you write the book about it, it's not the last word on that subject.
Right.
So yeah, it happened gradually. I think, you know, plenty of Tulab al-Ilm dream about assembling a whole library, as it were. But that came step by step. I didn't rush to get these multi-volume ones.
Yeah.
And in fact, I am, you know, I'm very proud of my books, alhamdulillah. You know, like people are proud of things in this dunya. This is a bit of the dunya, but at least it's connected to the akhirah. I don't have a collection of fast cars, but I've got some of the best books out there. But some of these things, you know, you can be proud of this fancy edition, the best edition. Sometimes people know, oh, that's an expensive, you fancy, you know, you spent some money on that one, yeah. But a lot of the times people rush as well to fill up their shelves with these massive multi-volume things.
Yeah.
The things that I'm often more proud of than that is some of the small things that your eye won't even catch. Because I know for every book in this library, the story of where I found it, when I found it,
Cool.
Why I picked it up, why I bought it, my impressions of it. Now, of course, when people come into the library, there's a question that they always ask.
Let me ask it. So you've read all these books?
Right. So I would love to be able to say that I've read all the books, but that's not how it works. You know, I guess sometimes people talk about a library and they talk about an anti-library. To me, an anti-library is a library, but what they mean by that is it's shelves full of things that you haven't read, so that you look at them and you aspire to read them and you get around to them eventually. Or in other words, it's a reference library.
Right.
there are some things that I've read cover to cover, I've thoroughly rinsed, and which thoroughly rinsed me, or at least let's say affected my thinking. And even some of those things I go back to some years later and I open it up and I've forgotten that I've read it, and then I see all the underlines and the notes and the scribbles and the questions and the frustrations that I've wrote in the margins, because I do write in my books, by the way. I don't actually mind that. I do it in pencil. But if I find something funny, I'll write lol. And if I find something, if I have a question, I'll write the question in the margin. And then later on,
practice.
If I find the answer to that question, I'll go back and write it under the question, right? Because it might be within the same book. I'm asking, but what's he going to say about this other thing? And then when I find it some pages later, I'll say, I'll go back and say, well, look on page 89. He talks about it there. So you cross-reference the books and you develop a relationship with them. And I think relationship is a nice way to think about life with books. So yeah, it's the unappreciated children sometimes are the ones that secretly you love the most, or are most proud of just finding something random that I know like nobody's got. So there's going to be a lot of things here which, if you find them interesting, you'll be able to Google and find someone that's selling it. You might find that somebody has scanned it and there's a PDF available. I don't know. Please don't ask me if the PDFs exist. I don't know, because the fact that I've got the physical book means I don't care about the PDF of these books. We care about PDFs of books that I don't have space for, didn't have a chance to acquire in physical form. But there's a certain ladha.
There's an
enjoyment.
There definitely is.
From the physical, but not just that, even in terms of just how my brain works personally.
Yeah.
If I'm reading PDFs, I just can't really retain. I don't have that relationship. So I just cannot benefit from PDFs.
I found myself engaging with books similar ways. Like the same books that are now, many of these accessible online, it's not the same kind of read when you're sitting there and just poring over the page.
Yeah, and even just the sense of, the right page and the left page. Yeah, you can try to recreate it digitally, but, this is at the start of the book. This is at the end of the book. If I'm looking for something, just somehow it'll be buried in my brain that it was over here somewhere and it was this, yeah. Then I might be able to find the little mark that I've made to relocate something, because I don't take very good notes. That's maybe.
Well, we have that in common.
But I do it in the books to some extent, and gain some experience in doing that. So it began to work well for me.
The reason I couldn't take good notes is because so many thoughts are crossing my mind, and it's just too much to write all that down. So
it slows you down.
It slows you down. So you just write a word or two, hoping that will trigger the memory of the entire thought process that it represents. Yeah.
I mean, one thing I would say is that I did sometimes see a talib ilm would get very excited about like lists of books, the must-have books, and then go and just splurge and buy everything. And then later on either regret it or just not know that they possibly should regret it. Because they might buy something based on hearing a rumor that such and such is the best edition.
Right.
But they're not equipped to read that book yet. By the time they get around to it in 10 years, a much better edition has come out.
Right.
So these kind of things I try to avoid. I waited when I was in Egypt, Al-Azhar, I waited till, mostly it was in the last year that I did my big purchases of the big heavy things that were going to have to shipped. I mean, this isn't the whole of my library, but this is the largest part of it. Inshallah, we'll see other parts. But also my personal library is heavily weighted towards Quranic studies. And
right.
That's unusual. So I would say 2/3 of my books are in Quranic studies one way or another. And 1/3 is in everything else, hadith, fiqh, aqidah, all sorts of things. But, alhamdulillah, that's plenty as well. But it's not anything compared to how much I have in Quranic studies. So when that was shipped from Egypt, it was around a ton of books that was shipped. So
you're not saying that as a figure of speech?
No, it was
an actual ton.
It was about 1,000 kilograms. Yeah. So I wouldn't have wanted to fill that with stuff that I didn't really want, because you have to pay for these things to make their way here. So yeah, I'm fairly confident with what I bought. There's some important tafsirs, for example, that I wish I had, but I wasn't satisfied with the edition that's available. So I've held off, and then sometimes
we're going to talk about that when we get there. Like, what does it mean to have
inshallah
editions that are satisfactory versus not.
Right.
But our plan is to kind of scan through this library. You've kind of broken it up into sections and divvied it up. And I think it's nice that, our intention for doing this was to expose audiences, students, but also just the general public of the kinds of study sections or study areas that are that Quran students and Quran scholars are engaged in, because on the one hand, it can seem really intimidating because it's too large of a world. And on the other hand, some people just say, you know what, forget scholarship. I'll just read the translation and figure it out myself.
Mm.
And those are both extremes, as if there's no further intellectual exercise needed. Who cares about scholarship? And on the other hand, you're equipped to do nothing, leave it all to the scholars. So those are the two extremes.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's important for, let's start talking about the general public. I think the average Muslim should know that the Quran offers a remarkable amount of depth. And people spent their entire lives trying to explore one area of its depth or another. And so that's one of the things that hopefully will come out of this, a sense of humility. And also, I think it gives us an appreciation that we belong to a heritage of so many souls that dedicated their entire lives contemplating Allah's book in one way or the other, right? And that's just how much it has to offer. They're not all saying the same thing. They're not redundancies. There's overlap, but these are actually unique strands of thought and exploration.
And some go right back to the earliest phases of the Ummah.
Yeah.
And some are very recent.
Yeah.
And then even the recent work sometimes is doing khidmah or service of the earlier works and representing them, packaging them, summarizing them, and so on. So it's an ongoing activity, and this shows the directions that further study can take, in all of these things and beyond. So, I mean, this book here, this is a bit out of date now. This is counting the works that have been published in Arabic in the field of Quranic studies up until 2009. So, دليل الكتب المطبوعة في الدراسات القرآنية.
So from the earliest?
From the earliest, but bear in mind that this is referring to anything in the era of publishing, as opposed to things that are in manuscript form and so on. So
right, okay.
That's been happening since the earliest. But only publishing means once the printing press exists,
now
we have published tafsirs and published Ulum al-Qur'an books or whatever. So I like this, I bought this just again sort of to be able to appreciate the breadth of different subjects that are covered in the study of the Quran.
Yeah.
And then this other one is Al-Rasail al-Jami'iyya,
university papers.
Yeah, up until 2004, this is specifically university dissertations, masters and PhD theses, and
in Arabic only.
Yeah,
these ones.
This would be within Arab universities, I should think. So these are very nice, but they're very out of date now. That's up until
2009 and 2004.
Yeah. So obviously there's much more.
I would imagine.
We were just speaking with Professor Abdul Rahman al-Shihri in Markaz Tafsir in Riyadh, and we had this preview of a new electronic database that they're going to launch.
Yeah.
Which is going to encompass, all
pretty
of
much
things,
any paper out there,
other languages. And so they were talking to us about trying to help with some of the languages, especially English. But the more that database gets populated, the more also that people are able to access resources. So if anyone, Muslim researcher, non-Muslim researcher, whoever is looking at a particular topic, they should be aware of everything that exists that is relevant to it.
Yeah.
Right? Because a lot of time it happens, and I might point out a few books that I've seen where it happens. In the introduction, the author says, and nobody ever has written anything like this book. And literally on the shelf, I have 2 or 3 other works that are exactly the same.
It's not just the authors that say that, I get emails like that. Brother, I have discovered something about this ayah that no one has ever discovered, or I know something about the Quran or about whatever else. So, but in a more academic sense, there are people that make claims like this. It was interesting that even at the ICSA convention that we were just at the end, one of the concluding comments by the organizers were, next time you submit your papers, researchers, please submit a bibliography, because many of you act like nobody's ever talked about this subject before and you're the first one to deal with it. Please cite your sources.
Yeah.
So,
and just that's a discipline that you're taught in academia, and it belongs to true ilm as well.
Right.
that you should have a sense of the isnad for what you're saying, or let's say all the things that preceded you in this that led to you being able to say what you say. That way you have a sense of adding to knowledge.
Right.
You're coming at the end of it. Right. So I think the first topic then, in a way, relates to this broad introduction that we're talking about, which is the subject of Ulum al-Qur'an. So
let's define that first.
Ulum al-Qur'an is, okay, I'm sure there's like a proper definition, but a basic definition is all the sciences and areas of study that pertain to the Qur'an. So when we define it in that way, then you could say everything in my
Then everything here is Ulum al-Qur'an.
Is in Ulum al-Qur'an. But there's a genre of works that are titled as Ulum al-Qur'an,
okay,
which in that way are attempting to be encyclopedic. So in terms of, this is not in chronological order, but in terms of encyclopedic works, the first one that qualifies for that is here, Al-Burhan fi Ulum al-Qur'an.
So this is chronologically the earliest?
In terms of those works that attempted to gather all the subjects in Ulum
So like, when you say it's encyclopedic, that can sound a little vague. Let's just, even though you're not going to be comprehensive, like a short list of some of the topics that our Ulum al-Qur'an text would cover, what would they be?
So before this period, before you have Az-Zarkashi and then we have Imam Suyuti and Al-Itqan,
right,
you had plenty of individual books which talked about certain sciences. So these are some works that precede them. But this is also, it's called Al-Murshid al-Wajiz ila Ulum tata'allaq bil-Kitab al-Aziz of Abu Shama. Now the thing is, this one you can see is much smaller.
And this is much older?
This is, this is 3 centuries before Suyuti, 2 centuries before.
Oh, wow.
Roughly speaking.
So science is related to the...
So it's not very big. We also have, I think, Al-Bulqini's book, Al-Kafiyaji's book somewhere in my collection here. So these also, this is a sheikh of As-Suyuti. But again, it's smaller. So it's telling you there's less things being covered and in less depth.
Right.
So by the time you get to As-Suyuti, he took the Burhan and numerous other works. There's a whole book here about the sources of As-Suyuti. What is it? Yeah. So
As-Suyuti's Al-Itqan is very common in Islamic universities and as a primer for Ulum al-Qur'an.
Al-Itqan is is at the same time quite an advanced book.
You've translated a good chunk of it, haven't you?
I translated a quarter of this book. Yeah. So Al-Itqan fi Ulum al-Qur'an, it has the first volume, which was translated. This is called The Perfect Guide to the Sciences of the Qur'an. But trigger warning. This book triggers me. This translation is extremely awful. And I don't say that lightly. I mean, there's plenty of translations that I would have some criticisms of, but this is an extremely awful translation. It should never have been published. And in fact, the publishers know that. I've told them, but others have told them as well. So I do not recommend to buy this. But if you see a volume 2, buy that one, inshallah, because that one is my work. But that's not out at the time we're speaking. But volume 2 spans from chapters 36 to 42. So I mean, in terms of the subjects covered, I mean, this could be useful just for the page.
Yeah.
No, it's not, because it just says chapter 1, chapter 2.
Oh my God.
But
I mean, off the top of your head, I mean, we're thinking about.
So we're talking about how the Quran was revealed.
Okay.
We're talking about how it was collected and preserved. We're talking about the readings of the Quran and the recitation of the Quran. That is roughly the things that are covered in
volume 1.
In volume 1 here. Okay.
And the one you translated, what kinds of things did it deal with?
So then from chapters 36 to 42, which is what I did, is mostly to do with issues of language. So Gharib al-Quran is like uncommon
vocabulary and phrases.
Vocabulary, so clarifying those. And then words that are from outside the Hijazi dialect or they come from outside the Arabic language. So we call those loan words in linguistics.
Right.
So things that were assimilated into the Arabic language but came from other languages, such as Greek, such as Abyssinian, such as Persian, and so on.
Right.
So there are these things are covered, and then lots of aspects of the intricacy of how Quranic language works. Chapter 40 in particular is called al-adawat. So it goes through every bi, ila, the lam, hatta, all these different things.
Right.
And it's the largest chapter of the law in this section. And it goes into how they're used in multiple ways. And that's all extracted from another book we'll see called Mughni al-Labib fi Kutub al-A'arib. Mughni al-Labib an Kutub al-A'arib. And the chapter that comes after is about I'rab, which is also from that book by Ibn Hisham. And then there's some more qawa'id and rules pertaining to plurals and relating to pronouns and related to gender and all sorts of things. Not in these modern subjects, but from a linguistic point of view.
Yeah.
So
it's kind of a primer. Here are the important subject matters that revolve around the study of the Quran. Before you engage Quran itself, here are some key things that an academic student should know.
In fact, it's not even an introduction. It is the source book that has gathered, up until the time of the Suyuti, and he died in 9/11. I don't mean on September 11th. I mean 9/11 of the Hijrah. He died. So that is a good 500 years ago. So obviously things have happened since then. But Suyuti's book Al-Itqan remains, and this is a one-volume edition, remains the one that is still most important. So there's lots
of probably works that are coming out after that are probably building upon.
Built on it. Yeah. So you told me something about this book, right?
Yeah. So it's Mabahith fi Ulum al-Qur'an. I used to have a hardcover copy of this book. It was the first Arabic book I ever bought because it was on sale and it was $7 and it was used. And I was like, ooh, an Arabic book. It says Quran on it. I couldn't even read the calligraphy at the time. And then when my Arabic got to a certain intermediate, not even upper beginner level, I used to bother our Imam at the masjid in Long Island in Bayshore to help me read it. Because this was the first book I tried to read without harakat. So we got through 4 pages and he gave up on me. But yeah, we get through 4 pages though. And I read those 4 pages like 50 times over and over again just to get the flow and what he's saying.
That's good actually to do that.
Yeah.
It's important to actually go over things.
That was my Ulum al-Qur'an book. I was like, I read 4 pages of an Arabic book.
Well, so this is a 20th century work. I mean, before him, so this is the best, people ask, what's the best edition of that, best edition of this? There isn't always a clear answer to that question, but in some cases there is. For Al-Itqan fi Ulum al-Qur'an, this edition, this is not the original, this is a kind of bootleg copy from Egypt. But it's the Mujamma al-Malik Fahd edition from Medina. And, the editors have done a tremendous job of getting the text accurate and adding useful footnotes. And some less useful footnotes as well. Honestly, I don't need someone to tell me that the author's Aqidah is suspect or something. I know that there's points where the different religious schools will differ. But sometimes they do this as a way of kind of sanitizing the work and making it acceptable to their public. So that's Al-Itqan fi Ulum al-Qur'an. And then in the 20th century, we have, in the early 20th century, Manahil al-Irfan fi Ulum al-Qur'an. This is by an Azhari scholar, Az-Zurqani. And it is also an important work. So it's the next work that probably is seen as important after Suyuti.
How does it differ from a Suyuti?
It's just written in a different style, but again, it draws heavily upon Al-Itqan and other works. So it's not like coming from nothing. So there are various others, modern works, and Sheikh Qattan's work is one of those. And in fact, when we were studying Ulum al-Qur'an at Al-Azhar, we were given a book that was sort of mysterious in terms of its sources, but I managed to figure out that some of it was lifted directly from this one, and some was lifted directly from the Zurqani's book.
I see.
And it was sort of patched together.
So, last question for you on this. How is Ulum al-Qur'an different from Ulum al-Tafsir? And is Ulum al-Tafsir a subset of Ulum al-Qur'an? Or is it a separate science altogether?
So, I mean, in what I've gathered here as Ulum al-Qur'an, I have a few things that are subsets. I don't mind that. For example, there's a section here about naskh or abrogation.
Okay. Which is one of the ilm of the Ulum of Quran.
Yeah, and it's also part of Usul al-Tafsir anyway. So,
right.
So, like, there's librarizing is not an exact science for me. You just need to be able to find.
You have to catalog in a way that makes sense to you.
Exactly.
Really,
Yeah.
At the end of the day. Yeah.
So yeah, in the subject of naskh, this book by Mustafa Zaid is fantastic. You know, a lot of people they make very quick judgments about issue like, oh, there is naskh in the Quran, there isn't naskh in the Quran. Well, until you've read Mustafa Zaid's book, I don't think you should comment on is there naskh or not naskh in the Quran, right? Because some of these people, they've gone into detail and they've gathered the data, which then allows you to make it. I've got various books that are denying abrogation, several books denying abrogation in English and Arabic. It's not uncommon for people to say, for example, there's no abrogation in the Quran. But, you know, you can come at that from a purely theoretical angle, or you can wrestle with
the actual case studies.
The data as such, and the case studies. So one of the subsets, of course, and within, right at the end of Suyuti's book, we have got some chapters about tafsir, what is tafsir, and then some of the history of tafsir and tabaqat al-mufassirin.
Right, categories of them.
And sort of their history and the progression of them over time as well. But I would call usul al-tafsir, the principles of interpretation, as a subset of ulum al-Qur'an.
Right. And really a science on its own.
And a science on its own. But of course, all the Quranic sciences are sciences on their own.
Right.
But the thing is that I would say not everything in Ulum al-Quran is pertinent to tafsir in any direct way. A lot of it is, and some specifics.
Like, for example, the portion of Itqan that you translated that mostly dealt with linguistic issues is heavily related to, hugely relevant to tafsir studies,
And it's the kind of thing that, a lot of these things as well, like you might think, why translate them? It doesn't make sense to translate. I agree with that critique. But having translated that, what sort of emerged has become a kind of Quran translation manual, which inshallah will be useful, right? Because specifically by translating the parts about Quranic linguistics and showing what has to happen in English to correspond to the points being made, now a Quran translator can use that to understand, how to handle these types of materials. When they see min in the Quran, what are the different possibilities? They're not just, they should read it in Arabic, but in addition, they can see, there's a min that means from, there's a min that means made of, there's a min that means
because of,
among, min that means because of, There's all sorts of mins.
Yeah, min that means i.e.
A min that means i.e., min bayaniya. So these are things which typically doesn't come out in translation.
Right. And actually sometimes translators butcher things like min.
Oh yeah, or they just write from everywhere.
Yeah.
And English creaks under that pressure of trying to use from in all these meanings.
Right.
Yeah. So after that, I guess I do come on to usul al-tafsir. And from here, it becomes usul al-tafsir.
I see.
There's this transitional period here in the shelf where I have some things to do with. This section here is what you could call manahij al-mufassirin.
Actually, I want to have a separate discussion with you about them.
Yeah.
I think we should wrap this one up here.
I'll pull them out. Let's discuss them, inshallah.
Yeah, inshallah.
Salam everyone, it's Dr. Sohaib here. You've had the chance to look inside my library. Now I'd love to take you inside some of what I've learned from there, especially in the flagship project of the Ibn Ashur Centre, which is distilling the insights of a great mufassir, Muhammad al-Tahir ibn Ashur. We have a special course for you on Surah Yasin. I'd love you to get involved. I'd love you to benefit from our new translation and commentary on the Quran. Head over to ibnashur.com/academy to find out more. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.